I think I am now. But I don't know where Gary is. It says I'm live. See if you can reach Gary and see if he got the one that says try this one instead. Hey, who do we got? Good afternoon, everyone. Bear with me while we try and get Gary in here. We're going to try and do this, get him in here quickly so we can get to some questions right away. Almost right away. Please forgive the glare behind me. We had to move to this location as a last minute thing, and I couldn't do anything about the glare. Did he get that link?
Can't tell.
Okay, hold on just a second. You may have to call him and see if he got it. We are working on it. Let me tell you all about me. I'm not sure who I've got in the chat room. I just know I've got a few people. Say hello to me in the chat room. I like that. I'm Shari Dovale. I'm with Redoubt News. And we're going to be trying to bring you this interview as soon as we know that Gary's got the link to get in here. Brett, call him on the phone. He is on a different kind of internet. If he's had issues with it, California, after all that he's with. The way I understand Google Hangouts work is actually going to flip the screen depending on who is talking. We were not able to set it up as a split screen for you to constantly see both faces. Might be a good thing. You don't want to see my mug constantly. So did he get it, Brett?
Yeah, he got it.
He's just having trouble getting in?
Yeah, we sent a second link.
Y'all have your coffee with you? I can't have that great discussion without coffee.
Okay.
I do have a lot of...
Hang on just a second.
Questions for him. And I hope you do too.
How do I send him a new invite?
I will do it. It's on the Facebook Messenger. It's there.
That's the one he hit on.
The one that says use this one instead.
It says use this one instead.
That's the one he needs to hit. Does he need to send me to send it again?
No.
Okay. Boy, I think I've been technology challenged this week. Every single time I've tried this, it's gone belly up. Oh, I think I see him.
Okay.
Okay, there we go. Welcome, everyone. Again, I'm Shari Dovale. I'm with Redoubt News, and we're here live with Gary Hunt from Outpost of Freedom. We have had a lot of controversy this week. The court has done a filing this week that was intended to extend Ryan Payne's sentence in prison for the Malheur Refuge protest. Sorry, I gotta shut some of this other stuff down. Anyway, the filing included 91 pages of a FBI agent's summary of a bunch of phone calls from Operation Mutual Defense. Those phone calls, the originals, are kept by Gary, and he's released the first one to me, which we put up on news, RETNEWS. Now, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Gary to tell us a little bit about Operation Mutual Defense, its history, and we're going to try and keep everything, basically a summary, not into a lot of extensive background, but a little bit so y'all understand what that is and where it came from. Then I'm going to ask Gary, who had access to this Dropbox. So Gary, would you like to chime in?
Okay. OMD was a spinoff from OMA. OMA was the Jerry Bruckhart and Ryan Payne, each having 50% interest in it, that did the call out at the Bundy Ranch. There was a conflict towards the end where Jerry wanted them to disavow OMA's participation or quit their participation, where Ryan Payne wanted to stay there. So they kind of parted ways after the Bundy Ranch situation, and I'd been speaking with Ryan for a while, and he was out of contact for a while with just about everybody. We spoke regularly, and we talked about getting a 5-man board, under a different name, which was OMD, which Operation Mutual Aid was the first one. The new one was Operation Mutual Defense. And so we set up a 5-man advisory board, the OMD AB. It was set up with 2 tiers, and the second tier was just people that had specialties that would not be participating in any decision making. And so that was the OMD AB, which is the one that is under scrutiny. Now, as far as the second question, it was agreed by all the members of OMD-AB, which was 4 at the time, that, and then later we got a 5th member on the 5th, and Dennis Dickinson was the secretary. He didn't want to make minutes, so he proposed that we save the audios of the meetings, that I put them in Dropbox. It was a private Dropbox, and that everybody then could download the audios of the meetings. It was done on a conference call on the internet. We realized there was no security on it, but the idea was to substitute audios of the meetings rather than minutes, and it was agreed to by all the members of the advisory board. That was done. Now, we didn't know at the time that Dennis Dickinson was an FBI informant. He was one of the informants I exposed when I was exposing informants. And at that point, when we got the discovery and found out that he was an informant, we realized that he had been turning the information over to the FBI, and the FBI subsequently got a warrant for the Dropbox account, and then from that point on had access to everything that was put in the Dropbox account, and all of them were retained in Dropbox. So they got virtually everything. And what they did then is cookie cut the phrases or sentences that were damaging, and that's what you found in the 91-page pre-sentence or sentencing exhibit.
Now you say that the Dropbox was private, but I've got screenshots of people saying that J.J. McNabb had access to that Dropbox and possibly others. Can you weigh in on that?
I have no idea how that happened. If I recall, we found out that it had gone public. Whether Dennis Dickinson did it, how it happened, I have no idea. But when we found out it was, we went back to private on it. And as far as I know, it's still private. I haven't been there in a while. I had retained all the audios on my computer, and I'm using that as a resource now to provide full audios. And I will be eventually have virtually all the audios of all the meetings out. They'll be coming out initially in the sequence that they appeared in the 91-page report. So the first one went out yesterday or the day before. As I have time and can write a little description explaining certain things, because theirs was cut up. And well, for example,
right. Well, hold on a minute, Gary. Let me just clarify real quick back on that same point before we get off of it. So you don't know when it went public, how long it was public, and who accessed it. Is that correct?
That's correct. There's no way to tell who accessed it. But if it's made public, then anybody can go to it. We found out somewhere along the line, somebody contacted me and said that it was made public. And at that point, I went back and made it private, members only.
Okay. Now, I want everybody to understand that I did not send you a list of questions ahead of time. As we're not CNN, we don't want everybody to think that we are setting up a pre-done interview. And I did not promise to give you easy questions either. I'm going to give you some hard ones. Like I say, I just want everybody to understand that. And to start it out, I want you to give everybody a little bit of background on Timothy McVeigh. That part is a very contentious issue. We want to know some of your background. We want to know how he got brought up in this discussion and whether or not you called him the first patriot of the Second American Revolution, and who else agreed with you.
I'm trying to remember all the questions you just posed.
I'm sorry.
How did I get involved with McVeigh? I was in Florida at the time of the Oklahoma City bombing, and I found out about it via a phone call and went to the news and found out about it. Now, Linda Thompson posted a picture of two guys. One looks like a short Indian, and the other one looks quite a bit like me. In fact, my wife, when she first saw it, said, "He looks a lot like you." But I hadn't seen it. But I was traveling around the country talking about Waco still. And when I was in South Bend, Indiana, which is a friend of mine lived up there, there were a lot of emails up there and calls to him, and they wanted me to come to Oklahoma City. So the first stop on the way down was, I can't think of the newspaper, or the magazine. It's no longer existent, but I stopped there, and the guy that interviewed me, we found out later, was also a government informant. And he made a phone call to somebody that was with me the morning of the bombing in Orlando, Florida, and he knew I wasn't there. And when he published the article, he said that I was not, he left it open. He did not say that he confirmed that I was in Orlando, and I called him about it, and he said, well, we want to tell our readers what they want to hear. And I went to Oklahoma City. The first place I stopped when I got there was Glenn Wilburn. His stepdaughter, Edie Smith, had lost 2 children there. And I went to his house. He picked me up at the Greyhound station. I went to his house. There were a number of people there. One was a reporter that still, he was, how do I put it, 3 sheets to the wind. And actually walked into the door jam at one point. And he's the one that didn't really hear the conversations, but the remainder of the people there, when they looked at the Montel Williams video from Waco and looked at the picture, that they realized it wasn't me, that there are definitely characteristics that were not me. The guy had less hair than I do now. He had a bigger belly than I've ever had. And so they were satisfied it was not me in the picture. The picture has the smoking building behind. So Glenn Wilburn was convinced it wasn't me. Another reporter had contacted me, and I went to see him. And he actually drove me out to Elohim City. I wanted to take a break between things and spent some time, 4 or 5 days out at Elohim City with Dr. Malheur, who I had corresponded with years before. We exchanged articles. And then the other person I contacted out there, well, 2 other people, Charles, I can't remember his last name. He was a representative in the state house. We talked about grand juries. And the other one was Richard Reyna, who was an investigator for Attorney White, who was McVeigh's attorney. And Reyna, I had given the articles I'd written about what I speculated on Timothy McVeigh. He took them to McVeigh, and Reyna thought that I should talk to McVeigh. I went to Elohim City. When I got back from Elohim City, I met Reyna again. He said that White had quashed my meeting with McVeigh, but he had given my articles to McVeigh, and McVeigh said, close, real close. And that was about the end of it at that point. Well, McVeigh was in prison about 2 months before his execution. I wrote to him, and we began corresponding. And he said very little in the correspondence, and the correspondence was considered confidential, but he wanted me to post some things. So I made a web page called McVeigh's Forum, and everything that he wanted posted has been posted on that forum. And it came from him, with the exception, I think, 2 articles that I wrote, and they're identified as by me. And in that, he explained why he bombed the Morale building and the motivation behind it, and even to the point of giving the background that he had.
All right.
Okay.
All right. We want to encourage everybody to go to those forums and read McVeigh's words, but we don't want to read them today online here. We want to keep going. We have a lot of things to cover. So do you want to wrap that part up?
Well, all I can say is what McVeigh wanted published to the public, and I became I guess, the funnel out from prison for him, the only access out, that I posted everything that he wanted for people to read if they're willing to take the time to read what he wanted to say.
Okay. Do you think he's a great patriot, the first patriot of the Second American Revolution? As that's what I've heard is quoted here. I honestly have not gotten through all the recording yet. That's quite a long recording, and I've had to do it in pieces. So why don't you weigh in on that one?
Well, yes, to back up just a little bit, between 93 and 95, between the fire in Waco, which I happened to be there, and standing on the balcony of the motel, I saw the smoke going up in the air and knew that people were still in the building, to my community, to 95, when the Morale building occurred. I traveled around the country speaking about Waco, and in the course of that, I met with a lot of patriot groups, and one thing I kept hearing is, we ought to blow up a government building. I probably heard that at least a half a dozen, if not a dozen times during that period of time. But when McVeigh did it, all of a sudden these people distanced themselves from the idea. Now, at that time, I indicated that if it was mine to do, I would have done it at night. I never said it was mine to do, but he had his mission. He had decided what he wanted to do. The reason I said that he's the first American of the Second American Revolution, which I did say, is because he is the first person that has taken on the government. Now, I don't agree with how he did it, as I stated, but he's the first one to actually take an active action against the United States government. It was a government building. And in that respect, he is the first patriot of the Second American Revolution. Not that I agree with it, but from an objective observation, I give him credit for doing what other people had talked about.
Okay. Well, from what I'm seeing, it looks like a lot of people believe, and it's probably starting with the McVeigh stuff, but it's continuing on. We're going to talk about this, that OMD was actually a terrorist organization. Now, we need to talk about that because of some of the things that were outlined in this 91 pages. You want to start, or would you like me to just jump in with a whole bunch of questions?
Well, let me give a little background of what the purpose of OMD. OMA did a call out to the Bundy Ranch. The problem was a controversy when I was in a partnership years ago in the survey business. And when you've got equal share partners and they come to disagreement, how do you resolve that? Which is why I recommended the 5-member board. There's a tiebreaker in there, and you've got more diversity of thought in it. So OMD was, to put it briefly, was a brainstorming think tank. And so we discussed a lot of things. We never approved any objective. We never assumed any control of anything. The Malheur takeover was never even discussed in the OMD meetings. But the idea was, if we're going to do a call out, we need to do background. We need to do investigation. I talked to Lavoy Finnegan, for example, that if he had a problem, OMD would do a call out on his ranch in Arizona. But the necessity never arose. But it was strictly to make a call out. It wasn't to. There was no real membership. We had the Tier 1, which was the advisory board. Tier 2, which would be people that did research or other work, a web page, things like that. And then there was no other tier, but there were a lot of people that either on Facebook or through a mail list signed up to OMD to receive notifications should a call up occur. So the only objective was to put out accurate information so that people knew what was happening, the very thorough investigation we'd done, and then they could decide for themselves whether they wanted to go assist somebody or not.
Okay. Well, it's like I say, a lot of people are seeing some of this intense conversation, and I got to include myself on this. When I heard things like kidnapping the Hammonds, that really got the hair on the back of my neck standing up, and I want to know whose idea that was. Was it your idea?
No.
And how was that handled?
It was Ryan Payne's idea. And it was discussed at great length. And as these audios come out, those discussions will come out. It was voted down either 3-2 or 4-1.
Okay, stop right there. Stop right there a second. Let me, I don't want to get ahead of this. Why would something like that even get discussed? And how could it not be voted down unanimously? You know, that's why I have a problem with this organization, this advisory board, is because they seem to talk as if the rules didn't apply to them. So tell me what you think about that.
Well, I think the First Amendment and freedom of thought come into play here, but Ryan brought the thing up. I think he brought it up when he was in Washington. And he had brought up breaking Skylar Barbeau out of the jail. You know, the idea is we bring something up, we discuss it. Now, when I said 3-2, when it was 3-2, Dennis Dickinson, the informant, voted on Ryan's side one time. We discussed it further, and finally, it came 4-1. Ryan Payne brought it to us. Ryan Payne is a good thinker, so he thought broadly, but it was unacceptable. As far as kidnapping, quite frankly, when we get to that point in the audios, my position is you don't kidnap people. You don't force anybody to do what they don't want to do. And so that was the thought process. But open discussions is how you come to those conclusions.
Right. Well, how about the fact that they wanted to break people out of jail?
Same thing.
Where did that come from? And who was in favor of that one?
Ryan Payne brought it to us when he was in Washington. About the same time he was. That was a little before the meeting where he brought the Hammonds up. And again, you know, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to take on the government and break somebody out of jail. That's illegal. And so,
did you actually have to vote on that? Did you actually have to vote on that, or was that just shot down without so much as a vote? I mean, to me, if somebody brought that into my group, I would just say, no, we're not even going to discuss this. And if they wanted to, I'd probably leave it.
Well, our
think?
process was any member could bring something up. We would discuss it and then vote on it. That's the process that we'd set up. That's how you discuss things. And so we talked about, you don't make somebody do what they don't want to. You don't take on the government by breaking somebody out of jail. But that process requires, in all fairness to everybody, that the issue be brought up, that it be discussed, and then it be voted on. That's the way we worked. That was the process we'd established for the operation of OMD. An open discussion and then a vote. And the vote was voted down. I think it was 4-1 on that one. It might have been 5-1. I don't recall if I even voted for it at that point after the discussion.
5-1, that would mean another member was there.
I'm sorry, 5-0.
I don't know. So Ryan brought it up and did not vote for it. Is that?
I don't recall, and until I get to that audio, I don't. You know, I'm an old man. I remember what I had for breakfast this morning, though. But it's hard to remember back. We had a number of meetings.
That's okay. I'm going to remind you of some of what's in there. Talking about using protesters as human shields. Let's go there.
I don't know that. I don't recall that. But that. I don't recall that. It wasn't in the first one. The only one that I've reviewed is the first one.
Are there questions? Okay, folks, I'm having, just to let everybody know, I'm having trouble with the group chat, so Brett's going to have to bring questions to me as we go. It's just not working for me, so but Brett's over there, he's going to bring them to me. So I apologize, Gary, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Keep going.
When I get to that audio and refresh my memory on it, I can respond to it. But, you know, I've only done the first audio, the, what was it, October 11th. And I've got to listen to them in their entirety and then make my notes and refresh my memory on it. I don't recall the discussion about human shields. Are we still working? You're frozen.
Okay, not sure.
He's back. Okay, keep going.
Okay, I don't recall the discussion about human shields. Until I get to that audio, you know, I can't refresh my memory, and I had to listen to it for 1 hour and 23 minutes to get the first one out. And it's going to take time to go through each of them one at a time.
You don't remember whether or not somebody was discussing using protesters as some sort of shield after convincing the judge to change her ruling?
If you understand how many meetings we have, no, I don't remember everything. We've all kinds of things.
that just seems to be a biggie to me. That's all I mean.
Well, I don't.
It just seems to be a biggie.
I got to be honest. You know, when I listened to that first audio that I put out already, it refreshed my memory on it. But I've got to get to that one before I can answer it. That's all I can say.
Okay. Was that not in the first one? I don't remember, everyone. Y'all have to help me out with that.
I wouldn't have agreed to it. I don't think. If we're talking about the protest itself, I didn't know that they were going to take over the refuge until after it was taken over. But I don't recall any conversation along that line at this point.
Okay. I do have more questions here, but I'm going to start asking some of the ones from the chat room. Joker J has asked, why weren't the files ever encrypted for everyone's protection? I do understand that somebody told me the Dropbox can be encrypted, but as you can see, I'm kind of technology challenged on some of this. Why don't you explain it to me on why that was never encrypted?
Well, I had no idea how to encrypt it. I had the conference call. We never even discussed encrypting it. We, you know, probably foolishly assumed that the government wouldn't even care about it. But we didn't know we had an informant telling the government that OMD was operational and he was on the board.
Okay.
And, you know, I don't, as these come out, I don't think there's anything that we can be ashamed of because of the process that we had and the fact that we never we never approved anything that came before the board. We went through that process on everything. And any aggressive action would definitely have been turned down because that was the majority feeling on the board.
Right. It just seems a little strange to me, actually, because Ryan was a highly militarized individual. He did a couple of tours. He's very understanding of how things work. Why wasn't he more concerned with OPSEC, operational security?
I can't answer that, but he's the one that brought the aggressive matters before the board.
Okay. I didn't know if have y'all never discussed that before? Have y'all never, during your meetings, do you remember any discussions on security like that?
No, that we didn't see any need to because there was nothing that we were discussing that would be illegal in itself. Now, Ryan and I had separate conversations outside the meeting. And for example, the bacon one that was in the
oh, that one's coming. Yeah, you might as well go now on that.
Who was the informant?
Dennis Dickinson. Go ahead, Gary. Let's talk about the bacon.
Talk about the bacon. Ryan had contacted me, and he thought, and I think in the audio I put out, it's discussed. He had talked with me, and he was talking about holding a knife to their throat, different things. What he thought was they were going to Missoula, which is near where he lives, with refugees. When we found out later they weren't going to Missoula, that it took the city council to accept the refugees before they went there. But his idea was, we don't know who these refugees are, and how do we find out what their background is? So he has some, say, more strenuous ways of getting them to talk. But the idea was to take their picture, get their information, what information we could, and turn that over to the local authorities, the city they were going to, so that they had a good understanding of what these people's background were. As it is now, we still don't know who's coming in this country. So this was a way of protecting Missoula, which was the subject matter at the time of that. Now, Ryan's and my conversation were made outside of the meeting. I brought it to the meeting and said that the least offensive one that we came up with was holding bacon in front of them about an inch from their face, but not even touching them with it, to get them to tell the truth about whether they were tied with ISIS or Al-Qaeda or something like that, to get their real background. So there was a concern. Same one John Ritzheimer had in, when he was doing his anti-Muslim things, that we don't know who's coming in this country. And it's a shame that since 1985, the country's just dropped all consideration of qualifying people before they come in here, especially under the refugee entry things, and we've seen the consequences of that. So the concern was based on that, and this was the least offensive, least one of threat of harm to the refugees if we wanted to get information out of them.
Okay, let's move on to the next question from Howard Archie Martin. Wants to know if you agreed with McVeigh building, I guess.
I'm sorry, that broke up. What was that?
Do you disagree with Timothy McVeigh blowing up the building?
Yes, as I've said, if it was mine to do, I would have done it at night.
Wait a minute. You would have blown up the building at night? Is that what you're saying?
If it was mine to do, if I had chosen that task to blow up a building, I would have done it at night, not in the daytime. Did I agree with it? We all have to make decisions in our life. And whether, I wrote an article, The Other Not So Thin Line, that there are some of us that have been patriots for 30 years, and other people became patriots yesterday. Can I judge another man's decision? No, it's not mine to do. I will never criticize a patriot. So when I made my evaluation of McVeigh, it was based upon a judgment call that I think he made the wrong decision doing it in the daytime. However, he does explain on McVeigh's forum why he did it. I'm not going to judge him.
But you just disagree with it being done in the daytime, but not the fact that it was done?
If it was done...
I mean, it is the people's building, right?
It's the government's building. we targeted Ford Motor Company's truck plant in one of the early wars. We blew up a passenger train. We blew up a water plant. You know, military's always got plenty of water, canned water, and everything else. But we damaged the civilian infrastructure in a number of campaigns. McVeigh's feeling, being a military man himself and being involved in, I think, the first Desert Shield, I think they called it the first one, was appalled at what he had to do, as was Ryan Payne. If we do it to other people, their sympathy is, why can't we do it to us as well? And I understand where they're coming from. Now, I'm Vietnam veteran, so we didn't do that over there. So I can't judge them from what they saw, what they lived. And so I'm not going to judge them.
Yeah, I have a real problem because I am very supportive of our military, and they've been demonized quite a bit. And this discussion seems to be leading that the military these days are, you know, kind of wacko and out of their head. As a matter of fact, I saw something in the filing from Ryan Payne's defense attorneys that talked about the military indoctrination and how he had, well, you know, basically paraphrasing, he had fallen for the military indoctrination and kind of, again, went wacko from it. And he's been trying to get better ever since. I don't like that term military indoctrination because it kind of demonizes all of our military and all of our vets. And now the way you're talking, it's almost as if we should expect that.
Well,
do you see where I'm going with this?
Yes, I do. But you've got a military standpoint. In Vietnam, I used to fly. I was an airplane mechanic, and I used to fly with the pilots. And they had what they called free fire zones. And I was up with a pilot once, and there was a guy, a Vietnamese guy, out in his rice paddy with his water buffalo, and he fired rockets at the guy. All we had was the 2.75-inch rockets. He fired rockets at the guy. It was a free fire zone. The guy's just tending his rice paddy, and I was appalled at that. I was appalled at Black Horse when I was up on a mission up there with another pilot that this lady had a basket on her bicycle full of groceries, I guess, and this guy from the cab unit just pushed her bike over, and all the stuff spilled on the ground. We helped her pick it up. So there were two factions in Vietnam. Some were respectful of civilians, some were abusive of the civilians. And that was, what, 50 years ago. And I've talked to a lot of veterans, and I don't think that I've found any that I've talked to that haven't realized we're not fighting for our freedoms by going to Iraq, Afghanistan, or anywhere else. So there is a bit of a problem because these guys are told to kill, and in many cases they end up killing civilians as well. So it's not the mentality, it's the psychological damage that goes from a total disregard for human life. So there is a problem that's created by the military. Our Constitution requires that only Congress can declare war, and they haven't declared war since December 15th, 1941. So there is a problem, and the government creates that by telling these people, go kill, go kill, go kill. So they come back with, say, a guilt complex. I felt guilty within a year of my time in Vietnam and joined the anti-war movement. It does create a problem, but that problem is not created by the soldiers, created by the government.
Okay. I want to go back a little bit. All right, I'm getting an echo. All right, let's try that. I want to go back a little bit to trying to break people out of jail and using patriots as cover for that. I'd like to talk about which people were voted on to break them out. Is it just Schuyler? Are we talking Casey Massey? Are we talking, I mean, what are we talking about? And who actually voted to use people, protesters, supporters as cover?
Well, like I said,
that's some of the questions that are coming out of the chat room.
I don't recall the protesters for cover. it's possible that Ryan was using that in return in regard to Skylar Barbeau. I don't recall, and until I get to that audio, I won't. It was soundly defeated, though. I can assure you of that, because the rest of us did not want to take an aggressive or an illegal act. We were looking totally defensive, like the Bundy Ranch situation. And Skylar Barbeau is the only one that I recall that was talked about. Now, the kidnapping of the Hammonds was another one that was brought up, and again, it was soundly defeated, or at least by majority. Both of them, at least by majority. I don't recall the vote on the Skylar Barbeau one, but the board we weren't there to take aggressive action, and that was probably a benefit, because if it was OMA, if Jerry Bruckhart had gone along with it, it might have been happened. But the fact that we had a board that was thinking things out, thinking of the consequences, and did not want to take aggressive action, that was voted down.
Right. There was some discussion about who was going to train the men to go back into burns.
Pardon me?
I'm getting some feedback again. Echoing. I don't know why we're echoing, Gary. I've got everything else turned off. So let's try this one more time.
I'm not getting an echo. Good.
Well, I am, and that could be causing problems with my audio to you. So let me try this again. Who was going to train the men to go back into burns? Was that Ryan, or was that somebody else?
To go back into burns on the 26th.
Yeah.
On the 20th, there was no training being talked about. On the 26th, I went, after I heard about Lavoie's death, I went down to the refuge to see what was happening. There was a meeting in the parking lot by the outside of the admin building, and I asked the people there, do you want me to put a call out? Do you need support? And they said yes. So I put a call out. There was no training involved. It was just a call out for people to respond. The only people that could have responded timely were the ones in burns, and they did not respond. In fact, there was a bit of a run-in with Brandon Curtis later over that. The next day, I spent the night. I went back to Burns to get my computer. Came back down. We did not have a hot link. We could not get out on computer. So I sat with Jason Patrick at the little bridge where the front end loader was across the road, and helped him coordinate his talking to the media, which was there in force. And then about 9 o'clock in the morning, we were told that when you left, you couldn't come back in. And somebody called me and suggested I get out of there, or they were going to arrest me. So I left at that point, went through the roadblock on the way out, and nobody had showed up. So sometime that day, when I got back, they were having a press conference at the hotel. I'd been up all night. I was exhausted. I took a shower and went down to the press conference to see what they said. Afterwards, I went back to the motel room, got a little sleep. When I woke up, I called off the call out because people didn't show up that could fortify the area. However, a few people ended up coming out there based on the call out. And, I met one of them, and we talked a little bit, and that was about it. But the call out was to hold the ground and give time to see what was going to happen. But it went down to the final four, and at that point, it was moot. Maybe it was a bad decision, but that was the request to the people at the refuge, about 8 or 9 people in that meeting at the time, as they wanted support, and I was trying to accommodate them.
Okay. Well, there's a question in the chat room. Was Ammon Bundy involved in any of these discussions?
No, he was not a part of the board. Now, frequently, Ryan brought things that he and Ammon had talked about. Now, before and outside of OMD, when Ryan was spending time making the PDF or the PowerPoint on the committees of safety, he spent 10 days here. There were a number of times that he would call Ammon, or Ammon would call, and we would put the speakerphone on here and would talk to Ammon. But there was nothing about things like this. You know, it's just a lot of it has
Okay.
to do with 1A17.
Well, you know me, I am all about the First Amendment. I'm all about free speech, free press, on and on. I will support everything in the Constitution, but I still have a problem talking violence in some of these groups. You got to help me get past this because you haven't done it yet. And I bet you haven't done it with a lot of other people. If I was, I'm not going to turn somebody in for just asking a question, but I'm also not going to stay there and discuss it with them if I think it's violent and going to hurt people.
Well,
so help me out with that part.
Okay, I've told you we never approve any aggressive action. Now, you're talking about the First Amendment, that freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion. If I have freedom of speech, I have freedom of thought. Now, our procedure that was established early on in OMD was anybody could bring anything to the board. Any of the members could bring anything to the board. It would be discussed and then it would be voted on. That's freedom of speech and it's freedom of thought. Did we ever approve anything that was aggressive? Absolutely not. It got turned down every time. So what's bad about that? That we allowed freedom of speech to occur in those meetings.
Right. Well, like I say, even discussing violence and breaking the law and stuff like that, you know, I would be quite hesitant to be a part of those.
Well, that's Maureen had an opportunity to be on the board and she chose not to. You're frozen again.
Because of, you know, had an opportunity.
You're frozen.
Okay. Am I still frozen?
Not now. You're okay.
Okay. You were saying somebody had an opportunity to be on the board and chose not to. Who was that?
Maureen Peltier, Sergeant Mo.
Okay. She herself turned it down, not because she was asked to leave, correct?
That's correct. She never got on the board. I was asked to contact her when we were looking for that fifth member. I was asked to contact her. I did. I explained it and she chose to turn it down. But let's go back to freedom of speech. So you're saying freedom of speech is okay as long as it's acceptable in your mind. I guess our minds.
No, that's not what I said, Gary. That's not what I said. I said I am all for freedom of speech, but my personal set of standards for myself would have kept me away from that group because I would not have wanted to be a part of it. Not because I would have turned somebody in or think that they don't have the right to talk about it, but myself, I don't advocate violence. And for somebody within my circle there to start advocating violence, even through discussions that could lead to violent actions, that is my personal thing that would have made me step away. Does that make more sense?
Okay, that makes sense. Now, I guess, you know, when we set OMD up, we set it up so anything could be brought before the board. That was it. That's the rule we had. Anything can be brought before the board, be discussed and voted on. So in all fairness, we were extremely broad-minded in what could be brought to the board because if we put any restrictions at all, then somebody's got to make a judgment whether he can bring it before the board or not. We did not want that. If something came before the board, let's go back to the thing with the bacon. That didn't come before the board because it was private conversation. So I brought it to the board with the bacon idea. I don't think it was ever discussed by the board. We just, you know, that dropped it at that point. But our process was no restrictions on it. How else do you properly handle a real discussion of the matters? But I repeat, we never approved any action at all. It was all discussion, no practical application on anything that we did, except we did support Patriots on Patrol and I think a few other, Tim Foley's border operation. You know, we did sanction some events that were going on outside, but we weren't a part of them. It was just that we discussed them and felt that they were good programs and sanctioned them. And I think those are still up on the webpage. If you go to outpost-of-freedom facebook.com/OMD, uppercase OMD, everything else lowercase. You'll see who we sanctioned. Excuse me.
Is that you? Yeah, apparently.
Yeah, it's me. It's okay. It's taken care of. So the only thing that
we did put, I just want everybody to know, we did put some of those links in the description under the chat today, under the live feed. And we will make sure that they are in there when we get done here. And that's your Outpost of Freedom links, and including your McVeigh forum.
Okay, there's the one that's just outpostofreedom.com. If you put a slash.
All those in.
I'll call you back. Bye.
Okay, let's move on to the next set of questions. How's that? Do you know when the FBI exercised their search warrant and got this information?
Without going under orders of the court, I got rid of the 1023 files. I abided. I said I would, and I did. So I can't go back and get the date. I had it in the 1023s. It was probably within the first week or two of operation of OMD. It was shortly after we began. We had our first meetings with Dennis Dickinson in. It wasn't very late.
If I remember your dates, the dates right on these documents, that was 2015 in the fall, correct? Possibly October?
Probably October.
Okay. Why weren't these used as evidence in court? Do you have any speculation and any valid information on that?
Well, I have speculation. That's all I have. But I think if they played a portion of the audio, the defense would have a right to put the context on them by playing the entire audio, and that would not help the government. Just like what we're going through right now, if we take the context that the government put in the 91 pages versus the context of what happened in those meetings, then we've got two different worlds. Sometimes very broad distance between the two.
Was Pete Santilli ever involved in any of these discussions?
Never. I don't know if his name came up or not during them. Was he involved in them? No, he was never a participant. His name may have come up. I don't recall.
Well, it seems to me that his name was brought up as a tool to use for disinformation. Is that accurate?
It would not be disinformation if it went out. It would be information, same as it was in Bundy Ranch, where Pete Santilli did an excellent job of getting out what happened to Margaret Houston, what happened to Emmett being tasered, what happened to who was it, Davey, that got arrested. He got accurate information out, and it could have come up. But was Pete involved in it, or was he contacted with regard to it? To the best of my knowledge, no.
Do you feel like this information would have exonerated any of the defendants or actually prove their guilt?
I don't see how it could prove their guilt unless talking about something can prove the guilt.
Well, I mean, we all know that the government cherry picks everything. If we just refer to Ryan, Payne, and John Ritzheimer, do you think it could have proved their guilt?
Absolutely not. They might have brought it up. We discussed it and voted it down, but the refuge never came up in discussion. Now, they have put Malheur out there. The reason they did is in our investigation of the Hammonds, they are surrounded by the Malheur refuge. And when I got the documents on the refuge that Shauna had gotten out, what we have is a picture that in 1983, Dwight Hammond, in a letter to the Malheur people, said, "You're trying to take my land from me." So they've mentioned Malheur in there to try and tie it to what happened. But the context of that had to do with the fact that the Hammonds were surrounded and the Malheur was trying to take their land from them. It had nothing to do with the refuge takeover at all. Now, when they cookie cut it, they've made it, and a number of people have asked me about it. They've tried to tie that into it. But this is months before, when we first started talking about the Hammonds, before the refuge takeover. and the takeover was never discussed. All the audios will come out, and you'll find out that the refuge takeover was never discussed. The only mention of Malheur had to do with the conflict between the Hammonds and the refuge people.
Well, it certainly seems to be more understandable since these have been made public, the motion filing, why the defendants in Vegas were transported the way they were. Does that make more sense to you as well? I mean, do you think it was because of these documents that they had in their possession?
Well, they know that it would be, they would have known that it was turned down and never made public outside of the OMDAB. So, no, I think they used it as an excuse. Now, let me explain. When I got arrested, I was arrested and I walked out on the street with my hands up and still had the guns pointed at me. I went up to them. They cuffed me behind my back and I said, "You're going to drive me all the way to Sacramento," which is an hour and a half drive, with my hands behind my back. And they said no, so they five-pointed me. So their standard method of transport is five-pointing people. They'll use any excuse, and this is talking to the people, John, Massey, Schuyler, all the people under federal arrest. They five-point them, and there was a higher degree of security, and I can't say why, but I can't say that they're justified by anything in these recordings that would give them cause to have any higher consideration of they're transporting the people there, because it was turned down very quickly when it was talking about breaking anybody out. And so if we put it in context, no, there's no reason to use any of this to think that anybody would, that we would promote anybody being broken out.
Well, I can see what you're saying, but honestly, I think that's what happened. And I think we're going to lose some supporters if they're feeling like they're going to be in the line of fire, basically.
Well,
we've got another question. Go ahead.
Let me add to that.
Go ahead.
Think about them spending 2 years before they go, almost 2 years in jail before they're going to trial. Was the government trying to punish them for what they did? Is the government vindictive? And so they wanted to punish them from the get-go. Why did it take 2 years to come up with an indictment after the Oregon indictment? Then they finally got in it, by mentioning Oregon, they finally got an indictment after 2 years in the third try with the grand jury for what happened to the Bundy Ranch. So there's a lot of factors in this.
There is, but we've got to make sure that our supporters do not feel like they're in the line of fire anymore.
Well, every person has to make his own judgment. Everybody's got to make their own judgment, and I'm going to be as open as I can about it. That's why we're here.
I appreciate that. I've got a couple more questions from the chat room. Question: in the first audio recording with the OMD committee, you spoke of knowing some at the refuge before going to Malheur, namely Sean. Were you referring to Sean Anderson?
No, I didn't know him before I don't recall. I think Shauna I knew.
So it's possibly Shauna that's what was said? Okay. All right. How did OMD learn of the Hammonds?
Ryan Payne. He had talked with Ammon already and brought the refuge, not the refuge, the Hammonds up. Now, when he first brought it up, that's when the talk about Malheur and the relation of Malheur and the Hammonds was, which is the only reference to Malheur, which the government distorted by making it appear that they're talking about the refuge, as I read the 91 pages. Admittedly, though, I've only read about 15, 20 pages.
Okay, well, here's another question. Is it your contention that every potential act of violence was brought to the table by Ryan? If not, who else brought them up?
As I recall, the ones that, until I review all the audios, I would say Ryan brought the ones up the ones that were controversial were brought up by Ryan Payne. Yes, the best of my recollection at this point, without reviewing them.
Okay. I have some more questions here. Hold on just a second, please.
But Ryan, remember, Ryan was living by that standard of bringing things up, and he was in contact with other people more than most of us.
Right. I've got some other questions here. It's been suggested that Lewis Arthur, also known as Michael Myers of VOP, is an informant. Is there any confirmation on that?
I have no reason to believe he was an informant. I was supporting, and we were supporting. He was one of the groups that we sanctioned, Veterans on Patrol. I was supporting Lewis Arthur in his pole climbing exercises to bring attention to 22 veterans a day. I mean, I think that's significant. We had supported his Veterans on Patrol and sanctioned that operation. And the last time I spoke to Lewis Arthur was after the confrontation at the gate when he was on his way back to Phoenix. And that was the end of my communications with him, because I realized that what he was doing. Now, there were three possibilities on who he talked about with PTSD. He would not answer the question to me. It could have been Ritzheimer, it could have been Payne, and it could have been one of the girls up there. And I don't remember which one now. But he came up assertively saying that he wants to get somebody out of there, and even got confrontational and pushed somebody into the truck. And, you know, his attitude at that point just shut off all communication with him. He all of a sudden proved himself a bad guy. You're frozen again.
Did you, hold on. All right, tell me if it clears up at all.
Okay, you're okay now.
Okay, did you own the Dropbox cloud service that was seized by the FBI, or did somebody else?
I set up the Dropbox account because I'd been using Dropbox for quite a while to get and distribute large files that were too big for email. And I had the conference call set up. So our first meeting was set up on the conference call, and that's when we decided to Dropbox the audios and give access to the members only.
Okay. It says here, Mr. Bundy put a call out after Lavoie was killed. Why didn't anyone show then? Only, I'm having trouble with this printout here, dear. Is this, only so many came. Why is that?
Well, I don't know if Kevin Bundy put a call out. I put the call out under the authority of OMD because Ritzheimer was subject to arrest, and Payne had been arrested. And by, you know, I didn't even talk to Dickinson at the time, but only a few people showed up based on the call out, but the call out didn't even last 24 hours. It was given out at night. It was called off the next afternoon. And that was, as I said, to see if the people, there were at least 30 people up in Burns at the time that didn't want another Waco to happen, as they said. And the possibility of a Waco existed with the final four. Actually, there were 8 when I first talked to Jason Patrick. Then it was down to 5 or 6. And then when Patrick came out, we ended up with the final 4. The possibility of a Waco existed, and that's why the call out had gone out when it was 8. And the call out went down when the people from Burns did not show up. They were the only ones close enough to respond timely. So the only call out I'm aware of is the one that I gave under the authority of OMD. And it was not an aggressive, it was a defensive act.
I apologize. I didn't mean to cut you off.
It was done as a defensive act.
Okay. We talked a minute ago about
You're breaking up real bad. You broke
Maureen.
up. Okay.
Is this any better, Gary?
Yes, now it is.
Okay, we talked about Maureen Peltier, that she had voluntarily turned down a position with OMD. She chose not to be a part of it. What was there anybody else in that same position that was offered a position that turned it down?
Not that I recall, but again, you know, I'm going to have to go through the tapes.
Oh my goodness, Gary, you sound like you got old timers disease.
I do.
I think I understand that one. What's the situation with Casey Massey? Could his delays and etc. be based partly on this?
It's hard to say, but there's two people right now that have found that their release dates to go to Halfway House have been delayed. They found reasons for it. That's Corey LeCue and Casey Massey. Is it because they're communicating with me? Possibly.
Could it be based on this information that was seized from the Dropbox, since Casey's name had been brought up?
It's always possible. You know, when I make phone calls now, sometimes I get this real stuttery sound on it, and I don't know if it's the intercept is just not settling in or not, so I hang up and then call again. But it's frequent. So is my phone tapped? Possibly. I think when I called you earlier that you heard one ring and then it stopped, and then I called you back. That's that stuttering sound, and I know that if you answer the phone, we're not going to be able to talk. That stuttering continues, and so I can't say what it is. Does the government like me? Hell no, they haven't for a long time.
Well, I'm just wondering how many people are being punished because they do like you. Now, answer carefully, Gary. A lot of people's friendships with you are going to weigh on this answer.
It's possible, you know, and I've warned people before that if you associate with me too much, there might be consequences. I'm not going to lie about that. Now, if you just read my stuff and communicate on Facebook, I don't know if there's any consequences to that or not. If you give a favorable response or are critical, I don't know. I can't answer that. I don't know how the government thinks. I know that they don't like the patriot community. That's become abundantly clear. Where you could murder somebody and be better off than if you're involved in the Bundy Ranch or the Malheur. There's no rhyme or reason to it.
Well, we need to heal some division within the community right now. This is certainly adding to that. A lot of people are very scared to be a part of protest and such right now after reading these documents. I do believe that it's possible that some of this was released at, the timing to reflect that could happen. I've got some more questions coming in, but it's going to take a lot of healing for this community, and I'm just not sure how fast that can happen. Hopefully quickly. Let me give you some other questions here. Gary, can you give us a heads up on what some of the other recordings may hold that might be enlightening or disturbing?
No, until I go through them. I do a lot. I'm reading constantly. I'm talking with people. I'm writing articles. And I am getting old, and maybe I do have some of that old timer's disease. But until I review the tapes, I would only be guessing at what's in them. And but I have agreed that all the tapes will come out. There's nothing that I would be ashamed of in those tapes, and they will come out regardless, because the government has tried to cookie cut those to make them appear worse than what the truth is. And I think if you haven't listened to them all yet, listened to the hour and 23 minutes yet, but when you listen to the whole thing, and some people have, and they're beginning to understand that the government has taken bits and pieces to try and damn the people who were involved in that, when in fact, if it was put in context it would paint a different picture, which is why I've made the decision to put them out.
Right. Well, we're going to get a couple other questions in here. I'm going to try and go through a couple of these because we've got another topic coming up that I want to discuss. It says, I believe that Gary mentioned that someone else had recorded all of the OMD conversations too. Were they turned over to the FBI? And I'm going to add to that question. Were they turned over to the FBI before they executed the search warrant?
Well, yes, I know that tapes were turned over before they did the warrant. Now, what I noticed in the first one, and the only one I've dealt with at this point, that there's a discrepancy of
about a minute, if I remember.
About a minute between the two. So whether Dennis Dickinson recorded it and turned it over, the file names are the same on both of them. The one that he turned over and the one that we had, it has the same file name because they mentioned the file name right at the beginning, right on the first page. They give the file name, and it agreed with the ones that we use. But how do you explain the disparity of about a minute? Because the computers are pretty accurate in things like that. So it's hard to say. But we know that he turned information over prior to the warrant.
Okay. So why did you keep the audios instead of deleting them? Plain and simple. There's a bottom line question. Why in the world would anybody keep these audios?
I don't know. I kept them. You know, I keep everything. If you looked at the thousands of files I have, I'm a writer, and you know, if we looked at the file cabinets over here, I've got, you know, correspondence from different people that on faxes that are faded now. I just have a habit of retaining things in case the need ever arises to refer to them. And I'm glad I kept them at this point. I'm very glad.
Well, I want to take you somewhere else right now in reference to all this OMD discussion. And we're going to go back to Bunkerville.
Okay.
There was a lot of discussion about that. Well, there was enough discussion about that. They'd like to know if peaceful patriots were used there in the wash, were they used as shields, as pointed out from the bridge, anything like that. And then we're going to discuss the references that Cliven, etc., have been stockpiling since then. Tell us what you know.
I did not go to two contacts there. There were two Ryans. If it dealt with the ranch itself, I talked to Ryan Bundy. If it dealt with the militia activities, I talked with Ryan Payne. As far as my understanding in subsequent communications that I never wrote about, but with a number of people that were there, the civilians that went into the wash did so of their own volition, and that there was no motivation. In fact, I wrote an article about Sheriff Mack because I did a little homework and I found out that there was a private meeting. Ryan Payne was not allowed to go to it when Sheriff Mack had a meeting with certain people at the refuge. I wrote an article about that, and I was contacted by someone I'll not name that knew Sheriff Mack in Phoenix, and she told me that she had talked to Mack, and Mack's meeting where they decided to put women and children out front actually occurred in the car on the way to the wash between Mack and his secretary. So, but I don't know because I've not written an article about that except for my observation about the private meeting and Sheriff Mack making that statement that women and children were put out to protect the people. And in talking with people at the ranch, I find no merit to that at all.
Okay, now there was a reference to what was left behind at Bunkerville and stockpiling that stuff for further operations, etc. Do you know anything about that?
No, I don't know what was stockpiled. I know that Lewis Arthur contacted me then. He wanted to go back and get some stuff that was left there. I told him I would talk to Buddha about it. I talked to Buddha. I called Lewis Arthur back half an hour later, and he had moved on. I told him I'd get it worked out so he could go in and get it. Apparently he didn't believe that I would. And so he left there to go somewhere else. When I called him, you know, he didn't want to turn around and go back. So I don't know what was left there, but apparently that some people had left some things there, but no weapons, nothing of that I know of that would be, you know, military stores, let's say. I imagine there was food left there, where there were contributions made, but I don't know what was left there.
Okay. Do you know of any discussions that Cliven, Ammon, Ryan, or any other Bundys were having about future operations?
No, I'm not aware of any. You know, when that was over with, I was covering the peripherals, for example, the Millers. When that came up, I made some phone calls, found out that they were not allowed. They were allowed on the militia side, the ranch side, for interrogation purposes. Were told to leave, and they were never a part of the approved operation there. The Millers are the
okay, so
cops.
So they didn't discuss anything within OMD about that?
OMD didn't exist at the time. OMD didn't come into existence until 20.
Okay, but did OMD discuss it later?
Not that I recall. Again, I have to go through the tapes. I've got that.
Okay, I've got it.
Disease. Remember?
All right, that's all right. That's right. You know, to be perfectly fair to everybody, only one of the tapes has been released, but we will be releasing, with Gary's permission, all of the other tapes one at a time, because he wants to go through and listen to them and remind himself of the discussions. I also would not be able to remember everything on multiple tapes from years ago. So I've got to give the old timer there a break on that one, and possibly schedule some further discussions down the road after some more are released. Is that acceptable, Gary?
Yes, it is. And I'm really clear. They'll be released to Redoubt News before I publish them on the internet, as we did this time. That Shari Dovale and in 25 years is the most responsible reporter I've met in mainstream in Patriot communication, as far as seeking the truth behind things, and an apt replacement for me. And so if
a replacement for you. Thanks. Okay, I've got some more questions. Okay.
Got to go 25 years now, though.
I'm going to retire before then. You know, I've been retired twice in my life already. I'd like to do it a third time and keep it permanent this time. Okay. All right. Doug has asked, where do you stand as an individual on offensive actions or stance? Could you see yourself as sanctioning the first shot, so to say, in an ultimate revolution?
I'm not looking for an ultimate revolution. I wrote quite a few years ago something called the Plan for Restoration of Constitutional Government, and that's the extent. And I think it would be effective in the least amount of bloodshed. I have read a lot of history, and I have never found a government to give up power that is acquired without force. So how do we do that with the minimum amount of force? I wrote about that. It is possible that it could be achieved without any loss of life, though when you have extremes on both sides, loss of life is perhaps inevitable, but it is modeled after what occurred in Massachusetts, New York, South Carolina during the Revolution, where communities at a time become, I don't want to say anti-government, but anti-unconstitutional government, that they took communities via committees of safety, and the nature of the community changed, and there was very little bloodshed in that transition from royal government to committee of safety government.
Okay. Joker Jay's got another very good question here. Gary, was your or any of the advisory board's intentions to incite a second revolution, no matter the cost? Yes or no? Just bottom line.
Absolutely.
Absolutely no.
Defensive actions were the objective of the OMD. Even though Ryan brought up things that were aggressive on occasion, the board unanimously would only support a defensive action And we wanted to investigate it thoroughly so that anybody that came to that action would have all the information that we could provide that would give them sufficient background to make a decision on their own.
Okay. Do you remember how many informants there were that you outed, confirmed in your research, and their names?
There's a page up that lists the names. I think that you've got all of them on Redoubt News. You have more
Yes, we
information
do have
than I do now because I was required to take it down. There was one more.
Yes, I do have a page. I do have an actual page that is accessible from our menu at the top of our page called Informants, and it does have a list of everything that was outed by Gary and anything else that may or may not have been added. I don't include anybody that is not confirmed on that page. So you're absolutely right, Gary. They can go there and get the list.
Then I think it was.
I'm sorry. Say that again.
I think it was 11 that were outed. It might have been 10. I don't recall.
Okay. I don't remember either. Okay. We're winding down to the last few minutes. We want to talk about Ryan's sentencing. First, we want to discuss if this report, do you believe, had anything to do with Ryan getting more than, you know, getting 3 years and 1 month, I think is what he was given. And go ahead and start with that.
37 months, and based upon what I've heard, I've not seen a transcript or anything, but based upon what I've heard, that Brown brought that up the 91 page quite a bit in accepting it as a justification. She did probably properly point out that that Ryan was the architect of the takeover, but you know, he's got the worst punishment to date. But then it pales in comparison to the punishments that have been handed out in Nevada. And with about roughly 2 years he's got now, he's got 1 more year and a month to go, or thereabouts. If they give good time at 15%, he's probably got 6 or 8 months to serve before he goes to, then he gets 3 years of probation.
Okay, talking about the division in the community, and I'm not going to point fingers. The question is out there, but I really don't want to point fingers. There's a faction on the other side, I guess, as we can call them.
A small faction.
Do you think you're being blamed by them as far as Ryan's sentencing goes? Or is it all focusing on you? Is it more about Gary than it is Ryan's actions?
What I've read of the report, I don't know why. There were some things that had nothing to do with Ryan. I think that I was the target of that report almost as much as Ryan was.
Okay. Why do you think you didn't get arrested? I mean, my goodness, if people are getting arrested for their discussion, you know, you should have been arrested several times, right?
What have I done to get arrested for except for contempt of court?
Okay. Well, like I say, you know, it seems like a lot of people are getting arrested for just discussing, you know, things. So I really have not delved enough into that answer, but we'll see.
Well, let me say that when I decided to go up to Malheur, initially I was going to stay on the refuge, and then I decided as press I would be better off to stay in town, and so I made arrangements with the people who were funding my trip that I needed a motel room and meals, and they approved that, and I went there instead. Now, there's nobody, to my knowledge, that's been arrested simply for discussion. Everybody was a participant to some degree. The only thing that surprises me is they did not arrest me for the call out that I did, but probably since it was so short-lived, it would be difficult for them to even try and arrest me for a call out that lasted less than 24 hours. So I was not a participant. Everybody else was a participant. Pete Santilli was a reporter. They acquitted him. They dropped the charges for him in Oregon. In Nevada, he ended up pleading. I've talked to Pete. Nevada is just trying to be harsher. He felt he was not guilty, but he decided that taking a plea and being able to reopen his radio show was more important than fighting.
Okay. Doug's got a two-part question here that we might have to end the show here tonight with, because we're getting close to that 5 o'clock time limit. The question is on Operation Mutual Assistance versus Operation Mutual Defense. Both imply that you're an organization with the purpose of aiding and defending others. Is that the case?
That is exactly the case.
Okay, what's the difference between them?
The difference between them is OMA was two people that could come into dispute with each other, as I explained earlier. The difference is we had a 5-member board, but there was more of a think tank, and that we had a tiebreaker on it. And so that the decision would be more involved discussion and handled in a more professional manner.
Okay, and part two, let's see here. Where do you stand as an individual on offensive actions or a stance? Could you see yourself as an individual sanctioning the first shot, so to say, in an ultimate revolution?
I don't want an ultimate revolution. Well, no, I would never sanction the first shot. The first shots have been fired. So if we look at it realistically, we can go back to Donald Scott, Randy Weaver, Waco. The first shots have been fired. They've been fired by the government. But does that justify us making the first shot now? I don't think so. We'll avoid Finicum. That I think we have to, like the American Revolution, we have to be responsive to their actions. I'm not sure which action of theirs is going to generate that reaction. But no, I don't. But I do agree with what I wrote in the plan that rural communities can take over their local government and convert it back to constitutionality. The government is ignoring the Constitution, hands down. The requirement for a declaration of war, for example, and we've been in the longest war in our history in Afghanistan, far longer than Vietnam, and there's been no declaration of war in either one of those. I don't know what's going to happen, but as far as I am against corrupt government, and we have a corrupt government. I am pro-Constitution.
Okay. You're pro-Constitution. You're pro-government, limited government, correct?
Constitutional government. Limitation. Constitution does a few things. It gives government authority, it limits government, and it grants the state authority and limits the state authority, and then we've got the 9th and 10th Amendments on top of that.
Okay. Brett, is there anything left? Or are we good to go here? Okay. Honestly, I think I'd like to have another discussion with you after all of the rest of the recordings are released. I think a lot more people might be able to get a bigger picture at that point. Right now, it's very limited. But I think it's going to be very appreciated when you release the rest of the recordings. Are you open to that? Would you like to do this after that?
I think it might be more, rather than wait for all of them to come out, which could take a month or two, the time constraints, that every time one comes out, we give it a day or two to settle in the community, and then we can do one, as far as I'm concerned. And so I leave it up to you. But yes, I'm more than willing to talk about, I'm not ashamed of anything that we discussed in those meetings. Regardless of what I said, I'm not ashamed of it. I think I want to be open. I've been open for 25 years, and I'm not going to close the doors now.
Well, I appreciate you coming and talking with us. You have not, hold on a second. Let me see if I can get rid of that echo on my end here. Okay, I think I got it. I appreciate the fact that you have not refused to answer any of the questions, and I do invite you back. I'm not exactly sure if we will do it after each release. I'm going to leave it up to everybody to tell me what they think on that, if they would like to do it after each recording, or if they'd like to wait after a couple of the recordings. We'll kind of let the audience go with that one and let me know. How does that sound?
I will point out for 25 years, as long as the questions have been presented as true on Facebook now, as long as they've, and this is back in the fax network days, the phone call days, as long as they're presented in a decent manner. When people get hostile with me and accuse me of being an agent and then they ask questions, I refuse to answer them. I want an open mind if I'm going to be willing to answer, as you've seen tonight.
Well, honestly, when you came in here, you and I have been friends for a while, but that doesn't mean I was not going to ask you the hard questions. That doesn't mean there won't be more hard questions down the road, and possibly even harder. I know that we do want to have more discussions, but the fact is I don't see disrespect coming into this forum, at least. I don't want that to happen, because that's not going to be productive, and I'm not one of the haters that are going to hate. So thank you again.
I knew that to be the case. That's why I was going to come on here.
Well, I appreciate it, Gary, and I hope everybody tunes in for more discussions. We will be having them. Gary has been gracious enough to agree to that. So we will let you all know when they're scheduled. Thank you, Gary. I appreciate it, and we're going to let you go have your dinner.
Okay, thank you to you and Brett for arranging this.
Okay, we're live with Gary Hunt from Outpost of Freedom and Operation Mutual Defense. This is Shari Dovale with Redoubt News. And please check the links in the description below this chat. You will see links for Gary's site and links for our site. Take care, everybody. Good night.